Welcome to Bookish Mind, Season 5, Episode 8. Today we're delving into Daniel Goleman's insightful book, Focus. We'll be exploring the really profound impact of self-control on our lives, right from early childhood into adulthood. And we're taking a deep dive into some fascinating research. It really unpacks how our ability to manage impulses and direct our attention.
Well, it's not just about avoiding that second cookie, is it? It's a skill that fundamentally shapes your destiny, your health, your wealth, even how well you do academically.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here, I think, is how the sources we're looking at connect, cutting-edge brain science with actual real-world outcomes.
Yeah.
It shows us not just what self-control is, but why it matters so deeply. And crucially, we'll also get into how it can actually be cultivated, developed throughout life. We're going to trace its development from infancy right through adulthood and, yeah, touch on some pretty surprising studies along the way. So what does this all mean for you listening? Well, you might just find some aha moments about your own habits
Yeah.
and maybe figure out how you can boost this really vital skill in your own life, maybe starting today. Okay, let's unpack this journey then, starting right at the beginning with toddlers. Our sources talk about how their developing attention helps them regulate emotion, specifically calming that very reactive part of the brain, the amygdala.
Indeed. And one powerful early trick parents use, maybe without even realizing the science behind it, is just simple distraction. Think about it, pointing at a birdie or saying, "Ooh, what's that?" with lots of enthusiasm. This kind of selective attention, it helps quiet a child's distress. But the key is you have to keep them intrigued long enough for that emotional center, the amygdala, to actually calm down. Because the moment that shiny object loses its fascination, well, if the distress is still kind of brewing in the amygdala networks, it can just come roaring back.
Right. So if infants learn this attention maneuver for themselves, it becomes like one of their very first emotional self-regulation skills. And that has, well, huge importance for their destiny down the line.
So that brings up a question. When does this capacity really start to flower in children? It's often called executive attention, and it starts developing around, say, age 3. It shows up as effortful control. You might see this when a toddler, intentionally chooses not to do something tempting, like waiting for dessert until they've eaten a bit more dinner. This blossoming of executive attention into actual willpower, into self-discipline. That's what allows us to manage those difficult feelings and ignore whims so we can stay focused on a goal.
And as kids get older, say by age 8 or so, this executive attention becomes a really powerful mental tool, doesn't it? It helps them manage other brain networks for those core cognitive skills like learning to read or do math problems.
Exactly. And with that growing ability to direct attention, naturally comes a deeper level of self-awareness. It's the mind learning to watch itself, really, to think about thinking what neuroscientists call metacognition, and also meta-emotion, which is basically, regulating your own feelings to keep yourself on track. Think of executive function as your brain's, well, air traffic controller, or maybe your personal CEO.
Yeah.
It's the system that lets you manage everything, thoughts, feelings, actions. Ultimately, executive attention is the key to self-management. It lets us direct focus, ignore distractions, like bringing your waistline to mind when you spot that really tempting cheesecake brownie ice cream.
It's really fascinating how the brain's actual physical development plays such a big role here. The sources mentioned the brain keeps growing and shaping itself well into our 20s, and these attention networks, they develop right alongside.
Right. And while, sure, individual differences in temperament are obvious pretty much from birth reflecting brain maturation, genetics, and executive control actually has the strongest heritability component. But the sources make it really clear that building this vital skill depends hugely on what we learn in life. Experience matters. Epigenetics, the science of how our environment affects our genes, tells us that genes have these biochemical on-off switches. And they get activated by things like diet, chemical reactions, and importantly, learning experiences. So the key insight here: even if you weren't, let's say, born with perfect self-control, your daily environment, your learning, it's not just influencing you. It's literally shaping your genetic expression. It empowers you to cultivate this skill throughout your life.
Okay, now let's zoom out a bit. Look at the really profound implications. Just how significant is willpower in shaping the entire course of a person's life? Our sources suggest its importance is, well, singular.
Absolutely, it's huge. We see this highlighted in a small 1960s preschool project. Kids from deprived homes got special attention specifically to cultivate self-control. Now, it didn't actually boost their IQ scores later on, but years later, those participants had lower rates of teen pregnancies, school dropouts, delinquency, even fewer missed work days. That's compared to a similar group who didn't get the program. And this actually provided a major argument for what became the Head Start preschool programs across the U.S.
Beyond those early intervention programs, what other sort of foundational studies really shone a light on this power of self-control in childhood? Was there like one particular experiment that really grabbed everyone's attention?
Well, you really can't talk about this without bringing up Walter Mischel's legendary Marshmallow test. You know the one. Conducted at Stanford back in the 70s, Mischel invited 4-year-olds, one by one, into this distraction-free game room. He offered them one treat right now, a marshmallow, usually, but said they could have 2 if they just waited 15 minutes. About a third grabbed the marshmallow almost immediately. Another third, though, successfully waited the whole time for the bigger reward. And what's fascinating is that the kids who resisted, they had higher scores on measures of executive control, particularly the ability to reallocate their attention.
So how did they actually do it? The ones who waited successfully, they didn't just sit there staring longingly at the marshmallow order. They used strategic allocation of attention. They distracted themselves, pretend play, singing songs, even just covering their eyes. Our sources make it pretty clear if a kid just stared at it, well, they were pretty much a goner.
Yeah, basically. So digging a bit deeper, what specific attention skills did Mischel see as crucial for this delay? He identified 3 sort of subvarieties of executive attention working together. First, the ability to voluntarily pull your focus away from a really strong desire. Second, resisting distraction to keep your focus somewhere else entirely. And third, maintaining focus on that future goal, the 2 marshmallows. All of this, working together, that adds up to willpower.
Okay, but that's all in a controlled lab setting. What about resisting temptations and showing self-control out in the messy real world? Our sources talk about this really groundbreaking study from New Zealand, the Dunedin Study.
Oh yeah, Dunedin. A truly dauntingly ambitious project. They tracked over 1,000 children, 1,037 to be exact, all born within a single 12-month period. Followed them from childhood right into their 30s. They went through extensive tests during their school years, assessing things like tolerance for frustration, restlessness, concentration, persistence, stuff like that. Then, decades later, researchers assessed their health, their wealth, looking at savings, home ownership, credit scores, investments, and also their criminal records, searching court records across Australia and New Zealand.
Wow, that's extensive tracking. So what did it reveal in the long run? Were the connections between that childhood self-control and how they turned out as adults as stark as you might think?
The results, honestly, were really shocking. Stark is a good word. The better their self-control was back in childhood, the better the Dunedin kids were doing in their 30s. Across all those measures, health, wealth, avoiding crime. Conversely, worse impulse management in childhood led pretty clearly to lower income, shakier health, and a much higher likelihood of having a criminal record. The statistical analysis found that a child's level of self-control was every bit as powerful a predictor of adult financial success and health and criminal record as things like social class, family wealth, or even IQ. In fact, for financial success, self-control was actually a stronger predictor than either IQ or social class of origin.
And it wasn't just about money either. The sources mentioned another experiment, American 8th graders. They were offered, what, $1 an hour or $2 in a week. And that simple test, that gauge of self-control, it correlated better with their GPA than their IQ did. High self-control predicted not just better grades, but also things like good emotional adjustment, better social skills, feeling secure, being adaptable.
Yeah, the bottom line seems pretty clear. Kids can have the most economically privileged childhood imaginable. But if they don't master delaying gratification to pursue their goals, those early advantages might just wash out over time. Conscientiousness, that ability to stick with things, seems just as powerful a boost in the long run as, say, fancy schools or expensive SAT tutors. So really, anything we can do to increase children's capacity for cognitive control is likely going to help them throughout their lives.
Okay, so if self-control is that vital, the big question becomes, can it actually be taught? Our sources offer a really delightful example from maybe an unexpected place, Sesame Street.
Exactly, Sesame Street. The sources detail how the show, which is beloved in, over 120 nations, It cleverly wraps entertainment around the actual science of learning. Every single clip has a specific curriculum goal. And they even consult top cognitive and brain scientists to make sure it's educationally sound. Then they test it with actual preschoolers.
That's amazing foresight, really.
Mhm.
And they actually applied this directly to teaching impulse control using, well, who else but Cookie Monster.
Right. In one segment for the Cookie Connoisseur Club, Cookie Monster is, being Cookie Monster. He just wants to gobble all the cookies immediately. But Alan from Hooper's store explains that to join the club, he needs to control that impulse. He needs to savor the experience. Pick up the cookie, look for imperfections, smell it, then take a nibble. Of course, Cookie, being impulse embodied, initially just gobbles.
So how did they figure out how to get it right? How to teach him? The show's creators actually went and consulted the mastermind behind the marshmallow test himself, Walter Mischel.
Yeah, they did. Mischel's first idea was to teach Cookie to think of the cookie as something else, like pretend it's a yo-yo. So Cookie tried it, repeating cookie's a yo-yo, cookie's a yo-yo, but he still bobbled it. Didn't work. So Mischel suggested a different approach. Alan told Cookie, look, I know this is hard for you, but what's more important, eating this one cookie now, or getting into the club where you'll get all kinds of cookies later. That focus on the bigger future goal that did the trick. Cookie managed to take just a tiny nibble, a major triumph of willpower for him.
It really illustrates how crucial that executive control is for learning, doesn't it? I mean, a mind that's too easily distracted by the mere hint of a cookie. It just won't have the staying power for fractions, let alone calculus. Sounds like many of us trying to get work done sometime.
Oh, absolutely. And parts of the Sesame Street curriculum specifically target these elements of executive control because it creates that mental platform, that readiness, which is a prerequisite for tackling harder subjects like STEM topics later on. Teachers in the early grades consistently say the same thing. They need kids to come to school ready to sit down, to focus, manage their emotions, listen to directions, work with others, make friends, before they can even start effectively teaching letters and numbers.
And the sources suggest something really powerful. Teaching these self-regulation skills might actually physically rewire parts of the brain, especially for kids where those circuits were maybe underdeveloped. That's just incredible, a real testament to neuroplasticity, isn't it? So this power to choose, to direct our focus and ignore distractions. It isn't just for kids, obviously. It's right at the core of willpower for us adults, too. So how does this play out in our own brains day to day?
Well, our sources describe it as this constant tussle going on inside our heads, a neural conflict. You can think of it like a tug of war between your conscious, goal-oriented, top-down thinking, like deciding, okay, I'm going to go to the gym, and your automatic, impulse-driven, bottom-up desires, like the part of you screaming, no, stay on the comfy couch. That's self-control in action right there. It's the battle you fight when your mind wants to wander off from your work to check your phone, just like that student trying to focus on homework instead of video games.
That tug of war definitely sounds exhausting. And it makes me wonder, is our capacity for attention, for self-control, is it limitless? Or is there, a finite amount we have each day?
That's a really crucial point. Cognitive science tells us that our working memory creates a kind of bottleneck. There's only so much bandwidth. So when worries or distractions intrude, these irrelevant thoughts basically shrink the mental bandwidth left for the task you're actually trying to do. The ability to notice you're getting anxious or distracted and then consciously renew your focus, that relies on self-awareness, on metacognition. It allows us to keep our mind in the state that's best suited for the task at hand. And this power of executive function, it can be taught. And it predicts good math and reading scores throughout school, actually more reliably than a child's IQ does.
It's really fascinating how this whole concept of controlling impulses echoes way back through history, sometimes in pretty extreme ways.
Yeah, the sources give us quite a stark contrast. Imagine 5th century Indian monks. They practiced contemplating the 32 body parts, essentially, focusing intensely on the unpleasant, decaying aspects of human biology, like dung, bile, pus, things like that. The goal was to build detachment from worldly desires, to boost their willpower. Now, however extreme that sounds, it really embodies this ultimate detachment achieved by radically changing your perspective on something tempting. It's a powerful illustration of cognitive control, of reappraisal across millennia. And then you have modern examples. An LA social worker described teen sex workers impulsively spending thousands on a new iPhone instead of securing housing. Some, tragically, even became HIV positive just to qualify for benefits due to an extreme lack of self-control.
Wow, that's a powerful and, yeah, very stark contrast. What does modern brain science tell us about this variation in impulse control today?
Well, they actually tracked down 57 of those original Stanford Marshmallow test preschoolers 40 years later. The high delayers, the ones who waited for the second marshmallow, they were still generally better at delaying gratification as adults. While the low delayers, the ones who grabbed it right away, were still, on average, poorer at stifling impulses. And brain scans revealed something interesting. The high delayers activated circuits in their prefrontal cortex when facing temptation. That's the brain's sort of executive control center, the part that helps say no. The low delayers, however, showed more activation in their ventral striatum. That's the brain's reward system, the part that springs to life when we're about to yield to temptation. It screams yes.
Right, this hot versus cool system dynamic. It sounds like a really classic internal conflict that probably everyone experiences.
It is. It's often described in psychological terms, maybe like Freud's id, the impulses versus the ego, the mind's executive function. Willpower is essentially that wrestling match, keeping us focused on our long-term goals despite the constant pull of immediate impulses, passions, habits, cravings. The prefrontal executive system, the cool system, works by suppressing those hot impulses and also by reappraising the temptation itself. So thinking about the marshmallow's shape, its color, maybe its texture, rather than how delicious it tastes, that lowers the grab it now energy charge.
And that sounds an awful lot like Michel's mental trick, the one that finally worked for Cookie Monster.
Exactly the same principle. Michel actually taught some kids in his later experiments to do just that. Imagine the candy is just a picture. Put a frame around it in your mind. Suddenly that irresistible piece of sugar becomes something abstract, something you can pretend isn't quite real. And that makes it much easier to ignore. This kind of mental judo, as Michel called it, allowed kids who initially couldn't delay for even a minute to successfully resist temptation for the full 15 minutes.
The implications of being able to do that, to use that mental judo,
Yeah.
they're really huge for so many areas of our lives, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. As Michel himself put it, if you can deal with hot emotions, then you can study for the SAT instead of watching television. And you can save more money for retirement. It's not just about the marshmallow. Gulp. This cognitive control, this ability to manage your focus and impulses, it's essential for navigating the kind of chronic cognitive overload that really typifies modern life. Research even suggests it plays a role in the obesity epidemic. Being distracted makes us more susceptible to those automatic, often unhealthy food choices. In fact, brain imaging studies of people who successfully lose weight and keep it off show they exhibit the most cognitive control precisely when they're faced with tempting, high-calorie food.
It really does bring us full circle, back to those ancient monks and their perhaps extreme form of cognitive reappraisal.
Indeed. The sources share this one telling anecdote. A monk is asked if he saw a woman pass by on the road. He responds, "Man or woman, I cannot say, but a bag of bones passed this way." Now that embodies the ultimate detachment, achieved by focusing only on the, let's say, unappealing underlying reality of the body. It's a powerful, if maybe unsettling, illustration of cognitive control and reappraisal working across thousands of years.
Wow, what a deep dive into the profound impact of self-control. It really touches everything, from a toddler's first tiny no to attempting marshmallow, to those huge long-term studies tracking health and wealth, and even, yeah, Cookie Monster's journey to join the Connoisseur Club. It's clear this ability to manage our attention and resist impulse is just foundational.
Yeah, and if we connect this back to the bigger picture from Goleman's focus, it really highlights that while, yes, some aspects of attention might be inherited, our environment, our learning experiences, they play such a critical role in developing and strengthening these executive functions. It's not fixed. It's absolutely something we can cultivate and improve throughout our lives.
So, thinking about everything we've discussed, what stands out most to you from today's deep dive? Perhaps the next time you're faced with a really tempting distraction, or maybe a difficult task you want to put off. You might just find yourself thinking about a certain ancient monk, or maybe even a beloved blue monster and his quest for just one cookie nibble.
And maybe this raises an important question for all of us listening. How might consciously focusing on the future benefits of making a small, immediate sacrifice, whether that's putting in an extra hour of studying, choosing the healthy meal, saving just a little bit of money, how might that fundamentally change your trajectory over time?
Definitely something to chew on, perhaps without a cookie right now. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.